The Dodge Viper is a weird mashup of off-the-shelf 90s Chrysler parts and custom fiberglass parts. Even inside the 8-liter V10 engine, you'll find parts used on other Chrysler vehicles. I used to own a Town & Country that used hydraulic valve lifters that had the same part number as the ones in the Viper. The hood latch release is from the interior of countless Chrysler cars: switches, brake calipers, side view mirrors. Anything that didn't make the car look crazy and go fast was a carryover part. Some parts, though, were custom just for the Viper: fiberglass wheel liners, fascias, the hood. The headlights were from a rejected BMW design, so the development cost was low, but they only ever existed on the Viper. What this means is that if you need lifters or a hood latch, you're in luck because they're real cheap. If you need a hood or headlights, hopefully you have several $1,000s in your couch cushions. I don't need a hood or a fascia, but I do need to modify my hood and fascia. I got these nice Falken Wild Peak tires that look great and fit neatly inside the rear wheel well. They also fit in the front as long as I don't turn the wheels, but I do need to do that, which means I need to take this Sawzall and saws all this hood off here and all the fascia off here and also all down here. So join me as I destroy $10,000 in Dodge Viper parts. My plan for this car was always to have a steel front off-road bumper, kind of like my 4Runner. I think I have a pretty good design ready to go for this, and I think I'm going to go with aluminum instead of steel to save a bit of weight. But this all comes later. I bring this up now because we need to make room for that bumper. You see, Dodge very rudely put a chin spoiler in the way of my future bumper. The front fascia has this very iconic crosshair grille. I want to keep that. But there's also this split line near the bottom of the lower opening. This appears to just be a styling thing. There's not separate parts here. They did change this lower part, sticking the chin out a little bit further on the second generation, but even in the first gen, it was all one piece. This is very convenient for me, however, as this is a perfect place for me to start my front bumper. Maybe that's why Dodge put it there, so I could have a convenient cut line ready to go. This is one of those bespoke Viper parts that they don't make anymore and is worth a decent amount of money, probably at least a few $1,000s. Not this one, not anymore anyway. Now it's worth zero money. This fascia normally attaches to the car in 4 areas. One is at the bottom, and there's no bottom anymore. The fiberglass bumper has mounts for 5 screws, but I'm not using that fiberglass bumper anymore. It's outside, getting rained on. There are 2 areas on either side at the front of the wheel arch where there are 5 fasteners on each side, of which I have removed 4. So of the 21 fasteners that originally held this fascia on, I have 2 left. This is probably not enough. No, I need to add those bumper mounting points back. So I made a new steel bumper with a little landing on top that has the mounting holes where they used to be on that fiberglass bumper. I didn't just add this steel bumper for the mounting of the fascia, I also added it so I could have a solid mounting place for that new off-road bumper that doesn't actually exist yet. This is sort of an intermediate frame. I tied it directly into the crash rails and I looped it down to the lower frame rails, so this actually picks up 4 parts of the frame. I did have to do a little more clearance to get the fascia to clear the vertical tubes of this guy. I think I'm probably going to have to add some features between the new off-road bumper and the fascia, but that is a problem for future Matt to figure out. For now, we're going to relocate all of this stuff onto the shelf. We're going to relocate it onto a shelf. At some point, we will need to find a new place to mount the evap emissions thing and also the coolant overflow that goes on the other side. But for now, they're just going away. Also going away, but permanently, is huge chunks of this front end carrier. This is a big fiberglass part that carries the fascia, headlights, that evap stuff, and a few other things. But it is getting in the way of my Wild Peaks, so it has to go. It's also fiberglass, which means when you cut it, you need to wear the proper protective equipment. I genuinely tried to keep as much of this as possible, but it really just gets in the way. But with a little help from the mini problem solver, the problem was solved. I cut out a lot of this piece, and I knew I was going to have to because in CAD I had made a wheel flop, which is just a volume of everywhere the wheel can be in every steering and suspension situation. Not literally everywhere, but mostly everywhere. I have since limited my suspension compression, so I don't need to cut away this part up here. But I do need to cut out the front end carrier, and also the fascia here, and the hood here, and also the frame here. I'm going to need a bigger problem solver. There is a frame tube that sticks out behind the front wheel connecting the sides of the car just inboard of the exhaust. I can't really remove this tube because there are jacking points out here on this rail, and also it seems like a good idea to maintain this node since there's lots of other things going on out here. I could have just used the CAD to get a good cut line, but I don't usually build things with the kind of accuracy that lets me trust the CAD. So I just took off the front coilovers and jacked up the front tire while turning the wheel. I just cut away metal until nothing was interfering anymore. I didn't add a ton of clearance here because it's unlikely for the tire to be in this orientation at full compression and steering in the opposite direction. This did include part of the wheel liner, so I had to add a little brace. I did cap this off with some sheet metal, welded it up, and painted it because I'm not a monster. With that out of the way, there was one other small issue, and that is this part right here, the fender. Except it's not a fender, it's a hood, a giant clamshell hood. These are very large and very expensive, and I'm going to chop a corner off of one because I like to party. This needs some work visually to smooth it out, but it does work with the tire, although I probably should add a smidge more clearance. The fascia also needs some trimming to clear the tire, a lot more actually. I feel less bad about this since I've already chopped up this for the front bumper. Nice. Several months ago, I put up a video saying that the front suspension was finished, and I put that video up because I am a liar. Not really, I just have a difficult time with the word finished. I don't finish things. But the front suspension is actually nearly finished. The one thing left, or two things left, are the droop limiters and the bump stops. I thought about getting the Fox bump stops since they have their shocks, but even the cheap ones were going to cost me over $1,000 for the set. These are cool, they're charged with air pressure so you can tune them. It is what all the cool kids are using. There's also the rubber squishy kind that comes on most cars, and you can get different aftermarket solutions. Not as fancy, but I split the fancy difference and went with 3D printed squishy bump stops. I have these on the front of my 4Runner. They're made by Perry Parts, and these guys reached out to me a while ago asking if I needed bump stops for the Viper, and I said, what a coincidence, I do need bump stops for the Viper. So I sent over some CAD, we talked about mounting points, and they printed me some custom front and rear bump stops. I'm pretty excited about these. The air is squished out on compression, so you end up with a kind of damping effect without any fluid or seals. I was a little worried about longevity, but they've got them on Baja trucks and have done significant cyclic durability testing. These guys are data nerds, which is always nice to see. Anyway, I link them in the description. They have a bunch of off-the-shelf and custom stuff, so check them out. The rear axle has landings for the original bump stops. I was going to use these, but that would require me to weld up a structure off the frame to hold the bump stops. It would have been fine with these, but since the Perry parts just need a threaded hole, I put them right above the spring perches since there is a convenient frame rail right there. I just sawzalled off the nipple of the spring perch and welded on a plate so there'd be a flat thing for the bump stop to hit. I found the center location by jacking up the rear axle all the way and marking that location. I welded a flange nut onto a metal circle and then welded that circle onto the frame. Boom, rear bump stops. The front was a little more of a challenge since there wasn't a good place for mounting, so I welded up a landing coming off of the frame using some leftover tube from the trailer build. It has a little leg coming off the bottom, so it makes a nice triangle. I did the same thing inside with a welded flange nut. The front bump stops were printed with a little kink in them so they can follow the arc of the lower control arm. That's why it looks wobbly while I'm screwing it in. I also added a welded sleeve on the top of these brackets for the droop limiting straps. Droop limiters are nice if you're going to do a ton of aggressive off-road driving. The damper is damped in rebound, that's what it does, but you're still slamming this threaded end over and over, and if the nut pops off, your whole shock is ruined along with whatever the shock shaft stabs into next, which for me, on the rear, might be my spine. So, I'll run some straps. On the big boys, you'll see 2 or 3 of these, but that seems a bit overkill for what I'm doing. I still need to weld in these laser cut bottom mounts. They are courtesy of, say it with me, Send Cut Send. I talked about this before, but I got distracted by a gate shifter that looked cool, but actually turned out to be a pretty bad idea. But I need to lengthen the shifter since I have lowered the transmission, and to do that, I need to lengthen the bottom of the shift lever so I can have the correct leverage. I explained what I needed to do in a previous video, but to remind you, I need to chop off the bottom part of the lever here, drill out the locating holes for a dowel, make a spacer with a dowel sticking all the way through it so it's all in line, and weld that together, and then clean it up on the lathe so nobody is the wiser. So I did that, and it was good. But I still have to install the shifter. I haven't done that yet, mostly because I still need to fix that frame hole I made to clear the exhaust tubes. I asked you all to remind me about that on Instagram, and you kindly did, but I still haven't done it. I did also ask you all to remind me to fill the nitrogen in my right front shock, and I did do that. I don't want to borrow that whole nitrogen kit from my buddy again, and I don't want a giant tank of nitrogen in my garage, so I made a clever solution. I got a shock filler tool that has a Schrader valve adapter that lets you unscrew the dimple pin to close the valve. It also has a gauge. Then I got a bicycle tire filler. These work with those CO2 cartridges, but they also work with nitrogen cartridges. These are used on mini beer kegs or nitro cold brew coffee. There's no regulator, so I had to just kind of slowly open the valve and then stop it at the right pressure, but it worked really well. Nitrogen is used in shocks because it doesn't change pressure as much as air when the temperature changes. It also won't corrode the inside like the moisture from the air. After I did all this, I realized I could probably get basically the same effect using argon. I have a tank of that sitting next to my welder. I could have just bought another regulator. I imagine this would work. I think there's some variation of the ideal gas law for nitrogen and argon that could tell me if I bothered to do any actual engineering on this. But either way, I'll put some links in the description if you want to make your own mini nitrogen filler. I mounted the battery in the trunk. I had to clear out a bunch of stereo equipment that came with the car. I don't know why you would want to ruin the beautiful sound of an 8-liter V10 engine with music, but to each their own. This may or may not be a good placement for the battery. It's just sitting on the fiberglass floor, still covered in the baby powder from when I 3D scanned this thing. It was on a tray connected to a big chunk of the frame that I got rid of. I might weld up a structure that just supports the bottom of the trunk here, possibly laser out a part that picks up these bolts that are hidden amongst the baby powder. I need to get this car running just so I can wash it. I still need to install the rear shocks and some of the spacers and the bolts that are supposed to go back here that I've probably lost. I am real close to driving this thing, at least a first drive. I want to finish up that front bumper, so that'll be the next Viper video. But soon it will be driving. Very soon. Right after I finish that bumper, and make new parachute tubes for the land speed car, and also a new tail, and also the whole body, and the windshield. And tune that Grom and swap out spindles on the trailer for lower ones and align the trailer wheels and figure out why the left turn signal stopped working and maybe even finish up that giant scooter I started literally before I started this YouTube channel. I am really bad at finishing things.